Welcome to Zen and the Art of Real Estate Investing. What if you could learn from experienced real estate investors, find out what got them to where they are now, get insight into their daily habits, and take these insights to inspire your own growth? Each week, Jonathan Green shares an in-depth look at the mindful approach to real estate investing. Jonathan is a lifelong real estate investor, advisor, and coach, as well as the founder and team leader of Streamlined Properties. Whether you're looking to start from scratch, get to the next level, or just for a straightforward and honest approach to real estate investing, Jonathan seeks to provide a free mentorship program you can take with you anywhere. Now, here's Jonathan.
If you are new to real estate investing and you're interested in multifamily, or you're just thinking, hey, maybe I got started a little too late, this is a show for you. My guest is Zachary Gray. We're going to talk about stabilizing and refinancing multifamily real estate and how he did that over and over with partners. Now, he only has 3 years in. So if you're thinking, hey, I don't know if I started too late, this is it. This is the show you need to listen to. Let's go. This is episode 153 of Zen and the Art of Real Estate Investing with my guest, Zachary Gray. Zachary is a multifamily real estate investor who's only been at it 3 years, but he has achieved some scale with partnerships. We're going to talk all about it. Zachary, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, guys. I really appreciate you guys having me on today. Thank you, John, for allowing me to come on and hopefully provide some value to listeners of the podcast. And happy to kick back and, talk some shop and hopefully just share some of the knowledge that I've been able to accumulate over the last couple of years, getting involved into real estate as I scale my portfolio. I'm really happy to be here. So thank you.
Yeah, man, appreciate it. And yeah, talk and shop is what I like to do. That's what this is about.
Yeah.
Real estate investors just talking about what they do because everybody's journey is different. In terms of your journey, when's the first time that you remember real estate being something that you thought was going to be a portal for you in the future?
Yeah. So there's multiple times in my life in my early childhood in which I remember back to times in which I thought about real estate in some capacity. Yeah. The first one was when I was very young, one of my parents, told me to be on my best behavior because our landlord was coming over to pick up a check for rent. I said, well, why do we pay him? Why do we pay someone else? This is our house. And she was like, well, that's like not really how it works. And she tried to explain the concept to me of hey, this person bought the house and rented it to us. And she basically was like, yeah, we pay him and then he pays money to the bank. But normally there's a difference and then he gets to keep the difference. And I was like, that doesn't seem very fair. Yeah. And I was like, and then I'm sitting there and I'm thinking about it and I'm like, so why don't we become that guy?
Yeah. Doesn't sound fair, but sounds very cool.
Yeah. So that was my first kind of moment of man, this person who's coming over, picking up checks, they got it going on.
Yeah.
It was a very early age. My high school had a really unique education program in which if you had a concept or a topic that you were passionate about, you had the ability to seek out through an online virtual learning program to take a class in that sector. And they had a massive array of topics. I actually, during high school, I chose to take a real estate-based investing course on an online platform in my high school as an elective.
Yeah.
I learned a decent amount there and it sort of kind of fostered me having some interest. And then during my early adolescence, late adolescence, early adulthood, I don't think it was very much of a priority for me, but I think it was something I was sort of always interested in. And I think the time in which I ended up taking the leap was a time in which I was aiming to actually, as a means of reducing my biggest expense during a time that was extremely unpredictable, COVID-19. My means of generating income at the time I was working as a personal trainer at a luxury high-end training facility. And my means of generating income was completely obliterated. And I viewed it as I had a college degree in a different sector in finance. That's sort of a conversation for a different day. But ultimately, I could opt to fall back on that degree. But I think one of the biggest things that I started to become aware of was how can I mitigate my biggest expense per month during this sort of unpredictable time? And I think that's when I turned to house hacking and real estate. And sort of that was how I ended up getting into real estate for the first time.
Yeah. Did you find bigger pockets, or did you find local meetups to get started when you finally said, like, wait a minute, this is going to, now all the stuff that I remember from being younger, now it's time to put it into play?
So I ended up finding bigger pockets. I actually stumbled across bigger pockets in a means to try to improve my own financial literacy. And I think that there's kind of a couple elements that kind of came into play here. I think that one of them was basically I was taking it upon myself to start my own business. I was driving around house to house to house, training personal training clients. I had a lot of in-between time, and I was using that time to begin listening to podcasts. And I was focused on trying to maximize my knowledge in regards to financial literacy, because I felt like there was a really volatile period of time in which the stock market was cratering, real estate was really, fluctuating. There was not a lot of certainty in the world. And, during my time in my early professional life, I was a very frugal person, and my objective was to bolster my savings and stock money away for kind of like a world ending moment or some sort of, very dramatic event. And this was it. And so I think that at that time when things got shaken up, my primary focus was, all right, how can I maximize this scenario? And that's when I kind of stumbled across bigger pockets. I sort of became infatuated with the podcast and started blowing through episodes. I probably blew through 200-300 episodes in the first 6 months to a year.
Well, like you said, I mean, one, podcasts are great for that because you can be driving from appointment to appointment. You may be like, oh, okay, I have an hour between appointments, but I don't have time to go home. It doesn't make sense. So, let me crush an episode of the podcast. When you were doing though, I think this is important for listeners who are trying to get started because, of course, now, BP has like 800 episodes. Even we're on episode 153 here. It's a lot to go through. Were you trying to pick certain things that you thought were more directed towards you in the beginning, or were you just like in a consumption phase where it's like, hey, let me just listen to everything and then see which things really start to like mushroom out?
I tried to pick things that were a little bit more pertinent to my life.
Yeah.
But what I would also say is that I specifically, at the time, the podcast was run with David Green and Brandon Turner. And there were episodes prior that were not with the two of them, and there were episodes post that were not involved with them. And I specifically targeted all of the episodes that were by Brandon Turner and David Green, largely because I felt like the content was very concise. It was very informative. It was very digestible. And I felt the capacity for me to be able to retain information and have some pretty significant takeaways was more likely than in the event of listening to a lot of other podcast options where I felt like it was very inefficient.
Yeah, I agree. Or overly scripted and boring. Like you want it to be fun so you can learn and also not get bored. But I was actually thinking as I was asking that, I've always said, to go through the titles, but the titles sometimes don't tell you the whole thing. It doesn't tell you if it's multifamily sometimes. So sometimes you're just going to get a great story. If you take a flyer on one, you can always listen to 15 minutes and then switch to another one. There's so many of them. Did you find yourself starting to hone down on what you were thinking about house hacking as you were going through the podcast?
I focused on podcasts that were centered around U.S. tax code. I focused on podcasts that were centered around house hacking, podcasts that discussed things like different types of lending products, understanding loan products, discussing strategies surrounding various ways to add value, whether it be excessive square footage or extra bedrooms or splicing units up or through renovation, understanding how properties were valued, residential versus commercial. These were some of the things that I focused on in the early going in order to create sort of a sound foundation. And then I began kind of branching out from there.
Yeah. And I know eventually you got to meetups, but do you think, I think that listening to a bunch of podcasts, reading books, it's not going to get you to take action, but it's really going to develop a dialogue that doesn't make you feel like a new person when you show up. Somebody throws out a term and you're like, I know at least a little bit about that. Did it help you kind of grease the wheels when you started going to meetups as someone who was, pretty new?
What I will say is that Bigger Pockets, with 100% certainty, absolutely did make me take action, and take action aggressively in a way that I probably wouldn't have felt comfortable with otherwise.
Yeah.
And I think a big portion of that was me doubling down on understanding the ramifications of the Federal Reserve printing mass quantities of money during COVID-19. I think that was pretty much the massive precursor that sort of lit a fire under me in terms of I need to get my hands on as many assets as I can, because otherwise I'm going to get left in the dust.
Yeah.
But I also do think that in regards to attending meetups, I would be lying to you if I told you that the first time I went to a meetup, I wasn't scared out of my wits. And I also,
yeah, that's good though. That helps people.
I also I'm a pretty blue collar guy. I showed up to these meetups thinking there's going to be a lot of people in loafers and tight pants and country club MFers that I'm what am I doing? And
I think a lot of people think that though, but that's not actually what happens, right?
Yeah. So it was a lot. I started to very quickly get a little bit more comfortable, and I started going to meetups more systematically. And now I probably attend 3 to 5 meetups a month on average. And I think I've got immense amount of value in it. And I could tell you point blank, I've met some of my attorneys I met my attorney at a meetup. I met one of my best lenders at a meetup. I've found deals at meetups. I've met some of my best contractors at meetups, and I have so many people in my network at this point that anytime I come up with a problem, even if I don't know the answer to it, I know exactly who I can hit up, who can help me find the answer to the problem.
Yeah, and they're already pre-vetted because you know them in real life. I mean, the forums are helpful. Facebook groups are mildly helpful, mostly garbage, but you really don't know who you're talking to if you haven't at least had discussions or done a Zoom. These are people now you're meeting them in real life. You can say hey, I can call Bob for this, and we already have a connection. I know 3 people who've already used him as a lender, so I don't have to worry that it's another scam out there, which is very hard for new people.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. So as you started, what was the first property that you ended up getting? I think that will really get us into the journey because it's been quick for you.
Sure. My wife and I, my now wife and I, she was my fiance at the time. We originally bought a townhouse in a central Massachusetts town called Maynard. We bought the townhouse for roughly $240,000. It had the ability to add a 3rd bedroom. We ended up adding the 3rd bedroom. We ended up selling it for $305,000 about a year later. We made about $65,000 on that property. We rolled the gains of that, and I put an additional $40,000 down to secure a duplex in another central Massachusetts town called Marlborough.
Yeah.
The duplex was listed as a 5-2, 2-unit, 3-bed and a 2-bed. But when I showed up to the property, there was actually 7 bedrooms. There was a 3-bed and a 4-bed. So I don't know why it was mislisted. I do think it could potentially have to do with slanted roofs, slanted roof ceilings in the in the 3rd floor. But in addition to that, there was also an ability in the 3-bed for me to add a 4th bedroom. So I was able to actually turn what was listed as a 5-2 into an 8-2. And
that's huge.
I did that in the first year of ownership. I acquired the property for $510,000, and I actually requested in my offer to have the property delivered vacant, which the seller was agreeable to doing.
Yeah.
And then I was able to reno one of the units. I rented the unit out, covered my mortgage, and then lived there for free. At this stage in the game, I have probably put about $40,000 into the building. So I'm probably all in for $550,000. My PITI on principal, interest, taxes, and insurance on the property is roughly about $2,500. And the 2 units, I have, my interest rate's probably in the 3s.
Yeah.
The two units rent for a combined $7,100.
Yeah. I mean, that's super. And I mean, that's a huge, you mentioned that you were listening to podcasts about adding extra. And I think it's really important that you immediately put it into play, even first in a townhouse, which is, usually regulated. So it makes it a little bit harder, but these are huge ways to do it. I do think people should take caution with it, but know about it, because I've just seen too many people say, hey, I'm just going to get a 1 family and turn it into a 2 family. And you're like, well, it's not that easy. bedrooms, if they're space, can be easy if you do it correctly, permit it, and make sure that it's okay in advance. You saw that there were already bedrooms in this multi, which is common with these attic or basement units that make it available. But that's a huge windfall to just kind of know that and do it right away.
Yeah, I would say over half my portfolio, I would say that we have added bedrooms to the units in order to optimize the financial performance of the building.
Yeah, so tell the listeners like what you're looking for in that. I mean, mismanaged listings are the best things ever. 5 beds and you go in and you're like, this is at least 7. Where are you looking to add extra space? And are there times where maybe a bedroom's not appropriate because your renter may want that extra living space?
What I would say is that I always opt for additional bedrooms over additional living space if the tenant prefers otherwise. Like, we own a significant number of units at this point. We actually will opt to relocate them into a different unit rather than sacrifice the performance of the building. And what I will say in addition to that is that in regards to what I'm looking for, oftentimes, so we operate predominantly in a market where a lot of the buildings that we have double parlors. So in most circumstances, this could be a double living room, or it could be a living room and a dining room. I tend to look for multifamily properties that have dining rooms, because if I have a dining room, the plausibility of potentially being able to convert some of that space into an extra bedroom is more possible. I also look for multifamily properties that have larger living rooms that I might be able to chop up a little bit to be able to add an extra bedroom. So those are 2 strategies that I would utilize. And one of the other things that I always look for too is obviously it's a little bit more direct and a little bit more sort of obvious, but searching for something that says like bonus unit or bonus room or bonus space or something like that.
But that's a good point, though, because even if you're looking on Zillow and you don't have MLS access, you can still be using those code words, bonus, mother, daughter, things like that, or the code words that can help you kind of sift through a little bit quicker.
Yeah. And oftentimes what I'll do is I'll just set my pre-screen to have so I'll set my screening criteria to be over so if it's a 2 unit, over 2,000 square feet, 3 unit over 3,000 square feet. And you're going to tend to find, if you find units that are 1,000 square feet per unit, the plausibility of you being able to find extra room to be able to kind of slice and dice is more possible.
Yeah, that's a great point. Somebody had on a recent podcast had just mentioned that as well. Yeah, you go for the square footage because you want big house, little bedrooms, because then there's going to be extra room.
Yeah.
So, part of your strategy, though, will incur a little bit more wear and tear because as you build more bedrooms, you're going to have more people sleeping in the bedrooms generally, unless they really enjoy home office. Has that been the case?
I would say yes. And what I would also say is that everybody has their own preferences in terms of how they choose to navigate in their ownership of real estate.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I would say is that in Massachusetts, where you have a pretty tenant-friendly, set of bylaws for landlord-tenant relationships, I specifically try to target having as many incomes as I can flowing into one unit, because in the event of a person losing their job, you're not at risk of not getting paid and then having to go through the full legal process, and the full legal process might not even work in your favor. So I insulate myself by trying to, I'm a much more prone to, I ask the questions of how many adults are going to be living in the unit. Can I, how much, I'm trying to beef up that gross revenue per month as much as I can to get over, 2.5 to 3 times income, sometimes north of 3 times income. And I think that, although you do incur a little bit more wear and tear on the back end in regards to a unit turn, I also think at the same time, I think that you also insulate yourself from legal costs. And I also think that when you have large quantities of people, I think that they're more prone to doing sort of a plug and play room rental in the event of somebody vacating. So then the plausibility of you incurring vacancy is less too. So my unit turn costs might be greater, but my vacancy costs are down and my legal costs are down.
Yeah, those are great points. And I think it's really important for people to note that that's your specific strategy. Somebody else, me, actually, I would prefer to have less bedrooms, make a little bit less money, because my management would be easier because I don't like to manage them. But I really like this strategy as a whole. And I think it's really smart because some people don't know if you have 3 adults and they're all on the lease and one doesn't pay, the other 2 are responsible to pay. That's how the lease works. So that is hedging your bets in a really great direction. So you can have, families with other adults, but roommates are the best because generally, hopefully everybody knows, roommates are going to pay more. That's why college housing works. They're really paying by the room. Have you had those renters as well? Adult professionals who I find to be some of the greatest renters because they don't really need to like each other. They're just professionals who come home, do their job, and share a kitchen.
Yeah, so I habitually tend to try to find somebody to hold the master lease, and then they have the responsibility of outfitting the rooms. And then what I do is every year when the lease is up for a quote unquote renewal, we just fill in the names of the individuals who are presently occupying.
Yeah. That's great for anyone who doesn't know. You're just giving the lease to one person to hold. They're responsible. So if 2 people move out, that one person's still going to be responsible. And then, like you said, at the end of the year, you convert it to, triple or whoever is going to be there as the adults who want to sign on for the next year.
And still to that point, every person's name is still on the lease.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that definitely protects you in the long run. Hey, this is Jonathan. Thanks for listening to another episode of Zen and the Art of Real Estate Investing. On this brief interlude, I wanted to tell you that we have a mailing list. I actually don't love mailing lists. There's so much. This is not an automated mailing list where you get on a drip campaign. These are written once a month, will eventually be at once a week again by me, direct, and they're not spammy. So if you want to sign up for our mailing list, you can go to bit.ly/streamlined with a D mail. Bit.ly is bit.ly/streamlined mail. See you there. When did you start getting into more units as you go and more partnerships? Because I think definitely we've seen in the world, like a lot of people are getting a little door heavy, but you have accumulated a lot of doors by making smart partnerships and learning quickly and figuring out how to leverage your money and help other people's leverage their money on these deals.
Sure. So the quick answer is when you run out of money. No.
No, but that, I mean, yeah, because, but when you ran out of your own money, what was it like to think now it's like I either have to partner, use someone else's money. Did that make you uncomfortable at all because you had the control, or you kind of were set up to be okay with it?
I view partnerships as dating, not as marriage. The way that I look at it is I would always rather own a small percentage of something than a large portion of nothing. And so with that being said, if I'm not partnering with somebody else to try to facilitate carrying out deals, I'm not increasing my overall value or my overall net worth or my overall portfolio in any way.
Yeah.
So, you have to start, like, real estate is a team game. And the sooner you realize that, the faster you're going to get to where you want to go, because you cannot manage 150, 250, 350, 500 units by yourself. You can't do it. And you're going to have a team members. You're going to have a maintenance tech, and you're going to have a property manager assistant. You're going to have an administrator. You're going to have partners. Like you're going to have to get into that sector at some point or another. And so I think that your ability to prosper is hampered by your lack of willingness to work with others. And so I sort of adopted that very early on. And I think that to kind of provide some more lineage or more clarity to the situation, I essentially did a couple house hacks. I took a line of credit against one of my house hacks. I think that the most strategic play is to buy a house hack, take a line of credit against it once you've optimized it. Do not use that line of credit because it will not count against your DTI until you use it. Then take out another house hack loan that sort of puts you in a pretty levered, maximized debt to income ratio position. Now you have multiple house hacks. Then take the line of credit and then use the line of credit on a potential partnership or commercial purchase with somebody else. Because in commercial multifamily, your debt to income ratio does not dictate your ability to get lending. Lending is predicated on the performance of the asset. Yeah. Now, for those of you who may be a little bit unfamiliar with commercial lending, there's sort of two options. Option one is that they lend to you based off of the day one rent roll. This is sort of called standard underwriting. It's a DSCR, debt service coverage ratio model. The secondary option is you can opt to build in construction funds to improve the performance of the building, in which the bank will actually take pro forma, so the optimal performance of that building rent roll. And this will gravely decrease the amount of money you have to put down on that property. So this is sort of the standard form of lending that we seek out and use on our projects at this stage. It allows for us to put 25% down on a commercial acquisition. And oftentimes the bank will fund between 75 and 100% of renovation funds once we provide them a scope. So I used this avenue as my first partnership. We partnered on a commercial purchase of a 5-unit building, myself and another gentleman that I met actually at a meetup that I had been going to. And so we ended up banding together on this property. To provide some loose context, we bought it for $650,000. We put $50,000 into it. We're all in cost basis at $700. The property a year later appraised for $905. We made $205,000, $100 each. We were probably each in it for about $112. So we made pretty significant money, return on our money. The $100 that we made each, we took a line of credit against that, and we actually then deployed that into another deal in which we made, even greater returns. So just to kind of map this out, we took a 2-family, we optimized the performance, we took a line of credit on that we now parlayed into this 5-unit in a partnership. We moved forward a year, executed on that stabilization. We then took a line of credit on that in which we bought a 9-unit. And in that 9-unit, we actually ended up making roughly about $330,000 on that deal. So the line of credit that would have been sitting in my duplex that I first bought, money would have been sitting idle. I actually ended up making close to $530,000 on 2 different buildings. I now own 3 buildings. I now made $530,000 off of that same money that I recycled. And now this is sort of the path this is what we're talking about in regards to ability to scale and the optimal path to help you reach that financial independence or financial free end game that you're searching for.
Yeah, and you certainly have a plan. I mean, I do get worried for people who leverage their entire equity if they don't know what they're doing, because then they could put it into something bad. But I think people forget when you take a HELOC, you can use the money for whatever you want. That's why it's so great. But like you said, you don't have to activate it. You get approved, you have it ready, and then you start paying on it when you activate it. But even if you have 200 in equity, some people say like, hey, let me use $100,000 of that right now to get going on something new. You kind of had a plan to go along the way.
Yeah. And I think to that point, like taking a line of credit at 8% or 9%, right? We were identifying deals that were cash flowing at, 11% or 10.5%. So, I'm taking a line of credit at 8, but then I'm buying something at 9.5, right? So I'm happy to pay the bank 8 if I get a 1.5 or 2% delta and now I own more property. If I take a 9% line of credit and I'm buying something at 11.5% cash on cash, well, now I'm taking a 2.5% delta in my pocket and I'm paying the bank 9. So like my point is, if you're taking a line of credit and then you're buying something that can't even pay the interest on your line of credit, this is where you get into some scary scenarios where I think this is why it's super important to be hyper vigilant on your underwriting practices. And also it's important for you to understand the power of utilizing lines of credit and leverage, but in a systematic, strategic way where the opportunity that you're taking on provides more value than the opportunity cost of the line of credit that you are taking out.
Yeah. You said something important that I wanted to touch on too. You said you're not really moving to another property until the first or last property is optimized, and that's really important because I think people do make that mistake as well. They in the accumulation phase, they're going to get another property, but this first one's not even stabilized. So that's going to mean more capex, which affects you taking the HELOC, later, and then having to go back and replace all the furnaces in an 8-unit or something. How are you figuring out the way to make sure that you're properly optimized or at least updated enough to know, like, hey, that's safe on a capex. We're not going to have any major costs coming through on that.
Sure. So when we do our underwriting for every deal, what we do is we basically say, okay, we map out, we sort of back into the purchase price. What we do is we say, at this purchase price, here's what the monthly expenses will entail. And we focus on saying, okay, here's what our prospective rent roll will be. So in order to determine the rent roll, we use fair market rent values. So we use government website. You can type this in for any state, any county, any zip code. They'll give you the fair market rent values, which is what Section 8 will pay for housing in that area. We use those as our rent estimates because worst case scenario, we can rent it to a Section 8 candidate and they will pay that price. So this makes our rent calculations extremely subjective. It's not biased. It's not an opinion. And so the bank really likes this when we provide information that is FMR based. Now, once we have the total rent roll, we can now play around with the purchase price to determine what the end cash on cash return will be. And so now what we do is we kind of back into, okay, what is the purchase price? What is the end price all in cost that we can have in order to make this perform? And we tend to target a 9 to an 11% cash on cash on all the deals that we purchase. With that being said, now we go back into the purchase price that yields us, a 10% cash on cash. We try to settle in the middle on our first offer. We now take that purchase price and we say, okay, based off of this, now we need to have 6 months of principal, interest, taxes, and insurance in our operating account. So we now include that as the total cash contributed in addition to the down payment. And then we say, okay, having walked the property, we put together an itemized budget in terms of renovation, and we calculate our renovation budget based off of making every deficiency in every unit A quality. So now, once we get that total renovation or CapEx budget item that we're going to now be accounting for, we now take the purchase price that yielded that 10% cash on cash. We deduct the renovation from that price. So now we're saying, okay, if we're going to buy it at $4 million and it needed $500,000 worth of work, we're now going to bid $3.5 million with $500,000 in renovation, and we're going to have our 6 months of operating reserves in the account. So now, once we blow through the whole renovation budget, our all-in cost is going to be $4 million, which is what we accounted for. The property is going to be at A quality, which is what we wanted. And we are now going to have a 6-month operating account set of reserves that will now provide security in the event of future vacancy or future CapEx that are set to incur. And so this is how we back into the equation of what we are willing to offer on a given property. Now, what I will tell you is targeting a 10% cash on cash return and accounting for 6 months reserves and your renovation budget, the sellers are not always going to be willing to work with you on that type of offer. So what I'm going to say to you is, just in full transparency, like we were on average submitting, 25 to 30 offers per month. And we were averaging somewhere between 2 and 3 accepted offers. So we're having an acceptance rate of roughly around 10% in regards to our current schematics. And so I just think this is important for people to understand, like, it all looks like rainbows and sunshine, when we post on social media and we're scoring all these deals. But like full transparency is like at the beginning of the year, like the two things that I would say is if you're taking the time out of your day to walk a property, you better be offering on it. Otherwise you're wasting your time. We offer on every single property that we walk. I was walking on average 6 to 10 properties a week, and I was offering on between 25 and 30 properties a month. And so this is the strategy that has allowed for us to scale at that capacity. I think this also provides some context just in regards to like how I got into partnerships, how we underwrite deals, and, the approach that we take.
Yeah. And I think, for listeners, what you're doing is due diligence. So if you're putting out an offer, it's based on you're walking the property, doing the numbers, and doing a lot of due diligence. Whereas there's some newer investors who think, hey, I'll put out 20 offers, but I'll just make them like 300,000 on like, whatever percentage lower. That's not a great strategy because you're not explaining why the offer is lower. You guys have enough experience to break it down. Hey, we are 500,000 below, but this is why. No offense if you don't want to take it. That's not a low ball to me. That's like a qualified, educated offer based on the renovations that's needed instead of the lazy way, which is just tossing offers at everything to see if, one fish will jump up and get it.
Well, and I think another thing that we also do is that we work with one of our sort of relationship-based lenders at this point, and they provide a pretty lofty term sheet for a pretty significant amount of money that we're able to just basically dish out to any person that we submit an offer on. So it's not a situation in which we're going after a $2 million property bidding $1.5 million. And then, because $1.5 million is what we can afford, right? We're going and saying, hey, this is a $2 million property. We're bidding 1.5 and we have a pre-approval for $4 million.
Right. That's a great point too. I do that for my regular home buyers. They always say, hey, well, shouldn't we just show them a pre-approval in the same amount? I'm like, why? Then they think you're backing up against the top. If you're approved for 2 million and you want to buy something at 600,000, that gives you all the leverage. You can go get 3 of those. That's a really good point. And I think that presentation matters because you're saying like, yeah, whatever, we're clear for 4. We like this at 1.5. If you don't like it, no problem for us. We can just go get a 2.5. Well, and I think the non-attachment to the asset is what helps you. You can lose 20 deals a month and still be like, yeah, we scored 2, great month.
And to that same point, like this is where we go in and we say like, hey, we're proven buyers, right? We're not looking to waste your time. We're not going to retrade you on inspection. Right. We went and walked the property. We have a full renovation budget. We know what this is going to cost. And so now when we submit our offer, we're saying, hey, we own, 200 plus units in central Massachusetts and Rhode Island. We can close on this with 100% certainty. And here's our offer. And here's our term sheet that's 2x what the purchase price is. And now the seller and the seller's agent are like, hey, these guys are, willing to play ball and they're going to close 100%. And so that is super important. We actually had a deal that was 2 properties, 23 units in Worcester that we actually bought right off the MLS that had offers over asking. We bid 10% under ask and they were trying to do a 1031 and, we own 100 units in Worcester and we're like, hey, we'll pay this, no questions asked. And they were like, yeah sounds good. And because they want the sure close.
For sure. And I think, that's the balance of who you're dealing with, building relationships and making a very strong presentation and also saying, like you said, hey, we're not the investors who retrade on inspections. We've done all of our due diligence. This is what it's going to take, barring finding something that nobody knew about, which of course could always throw it off. That's a difference. And I would always use that as the same leverage. Hey, this is what we're doing. We're not looking to retrade. Those 2 over there, you should look it up because what's coming. They're bidding extra high. It's too high. So what do you think is going to happen on inspection of 42 units? It's not going to be pretty.
And to that same point, I know that early in the podcast you had mentioned that we've talked about this before, but real estate is a game of just relentless action taking. Action taking is the name of the game. And on that particular example, right, the property comes on the MLS on a Sunday night. My partner and I are in conversations. Within 30 minutes, the property has already been underwritten. We've already contacted the seller. We've already provided our offer. We've already provided our term sheet. We've already requested to walk the property 12 hours later. Then we walk the property 12 hours later, but we show up with our number 1 electrician, our number one GC, our number one foundation guy, and our number one plumber. We paid all of our contractors to walk our property with us. So then that, because it was going to be a big deal. And so we ended up walking it with all of our preferred vendors. And within 12 hours of the property having been listed on the MLS, there was 30 other people lining up to walk the property. And so the fact of the matter is,
by themselves, though.
Yes. So we got in there and we actually contacted the seller, submitted our offer, gave them our term sheet, and walked the property with all of our preferred vendors and said, no retrade, offers good. And they were like, wow, these guys are pros, right?
Yeah, it's a really important point, because you have to know who you're up against and what everybody else is doing. And what everyone else is doing is getting into the cattle call, showing up, and then saying, hey, well, I'll bring my contractor back next week. It's like, no, there's no time for that. Like, these people want to close, especially people who are working on a deadline. Yeah, you guys are, systematizing the process with the people there. And I think other people also might think, well, that's a lot. You're going to bring all those people. Yeah, the real investor and real owners will appreciate that, because then they know your offer is much more solid than the ones who haven't had anyone kick the tires already.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's good. No reason to wait for formal inspection when you have people who already do work for you to just swing out at the same time, so you can beat everyone to the punch. I think that's a great point. And really only available as you grow your network and partnerships, because when you were brand new, you're not going to call up a contractor and be like, hey, you want to swing by this 2-family with me? They're like, who are you? No, I don't want to swing by the 2-family. So those are things that have helped you along the way, right? Because it seems like you've really helped, been involved building the team, working with other people, and making sure that those relationships are there, so you can call someone and say, hey, we have a streamer and it's like a 50 unit, like, we need you, and they'll be there.
Yeah, I mean, 100%. And one of the things that I would say too is that, like, for those of you who are in the early stages and who are looking to get started, it's like, one of the things that you can all do, and you are not, prohibited to right now, is taking an Excel sheet and building your contractor Rolodex for the area in which you're going to be operating. Who is your go-to plumbers? Who are your go-to electricians? Who are your go-to masons? And on and on and on down the line. And if you don't have 5, 6, 7 people for each specialty, you're behind the 8 ball, because now you're reacting instead of being proactive and having solutions already in place. And this becomes super imperative when you're going to bring on somebody who's going to help you on the management side, on the PM side, to handle all your maintenance requests and deal with all the day-to-day operative stuff while you're trying to scale the portfolio. So you're going to need those contacts in place. And I think that in the early going, while you're still getting started, you have the ability to A, go out and source those yourself, or B, hit up proven investors in the area that have favorable relationships. I can't tell you a lot of my number one guys are number one guys that were referred to me from somebody else who is also a great investor. And so to that point, right? And what I will say too is, I have multiple people per week hit me up and say, hey, can you send me your plumber? Hey, can you send me your electrician? And the answer is 1000%. Absolutely. And the reason being is that if I refer all my proven guys out to my friends, now what's going to happen is my contractor is going to grow their business. So as I scale my portfolio and I want to work with them, they're going to have a bigger crew to be able to help me. And the second thing is that when I'm funneling them new business and they know it's coming from me, when I call them, guess what? They're leaving any job site. They're coming to me and helping me immediately, because they know, right? I'm the person who's feeding them. And so the whole point here is that you have to create those relationships with your proven vendors, and don't operate from a hoarding mentality, and operate from an abundance mentality where you want them to scale and you want them to win and you want them to grow their businesses too.
Yeah, I think there's so many good points in there. I love having a depth chart of each thing, because I just think it's important. Sometimes if it's someone newer, I maybe not want to bother my number one electrician with this person, because I don't know them that well. My number 3 electrician, they're hungry. They're going to go out, get it, and they'll actually give me feedback on whether the person was bullshit or not. So I think that's really important. And you want to help the people. I think hoarding is a weird thing that doesn't really happen inside the true investor circles. We all share everything, because you're making a really good point that if you want to scale, it helps if your contractor can scale, because you don't want to overwhelm them. So you're working together. And just as you said, so importantly, if you're the one giving business to your friends, contractors, and people, subs, when it comes down to, if it's between you and someone that you've referred them just because you have to get something done quickly, they're always going to come to you first. It's not going to affect what the other person's doing, but they're going to know that you're in a win-win relationship where you're not just saying like, hey, I pay you, do what I say. Nobody is going to stay in that relationship.
And this comes back to one of my favorite sayings, which is people at the bottom compete and people at the top collaborate. And so, with that being said, it's like, I can't tell you, like, you were asking a question earlier about like desire to partner and getting into partnerships and like scaling your portfolio and like, how do you decide like who to work with? And it's like, the nature of it is you're not always going to always have all resources available at all times. You're not always going to have bandwidth, capital, and the deal. Right? So you might at some points you might have two of the three, you might have one of the three.
Yeah.
But the fact of the matter is, again, small piece of something rather than large piece of nothing. Right? So it's like, if I got a deal and I got bandwidth, but I got no capital, I'm going to go find somebody to help me out. If I have a deal and I got capital, but I don't have bandwidth, I'm going to go find an operator. Right? If I have, the ability to operate and capital, right, then I'm going to try and entice people to bring me deals. So like that's how you have to operate in order to continue to prosper and succeed. And this is exactly what we do. Like in the beginning of the year, right, we had bandwidth and capital and we were struggling on the deal flow side. We started hitting up people in our network saying, if you find a deal and you bring it to us, we will literally go a third, me, my partner, and you on the GP side.
Yeah.
Right. And it's like, I'm giving you a third of the take and just for bringing the deal. Now I would say,
that's creative as well. Yeah. But I think you can't be out there asking for any of those three things unless you're present at the meetups, building the relationships, because it's always weird to me when someone comes in with you just see like a random post in the forums. They're like, hey, I've got this deal, but I don't have any money. Who wants to take this down with me? You're like, I don't even know you. Like, no one's taking it down with you. Nobody knows you. This is an open forum. Have you found that your access to all of these things, like you said, you're going to say, hey, we'll give you a third of the deal. And they also know that you're a closer. So like, this is the biggest win in the century. Now they're going to go digging for deals and you guys can be working on stabilizing properties. Yeah. 100%. And what I will also say too is, we're just talking about building your contractor Rolodex, and that's something that you can do while you're trying to get your foot in the door and you're trying to get started. The same thing holds true on the social media front, right? Are you going in forums? Are you commenting on forums? Are you connecting with people? Are you meeting people for coffee? Are you networking at meetups? Additionally, are you posting social media content? What I will say is like my partner, 2-3 years ago, I was crapping all over him for him posting endless amounts of social media content. And I'm like, dude, what are you doing? You look like I'm going to make fun of Andrew in a second, just for everyone's benefit.
And so my whole point is, I'm like, you look like a fool. But the thing is that that's all fine and well. When you're the dude that has 7 units and you're posting TikTok reels 3 times a day, people are like, who the fuck is this guy? But what I will also tell you is, we have gotten multiple deals in the Worcester County area because somebody was like, who's that guy who posts all those videos in the Worcester County area that I found a deal in Worcester, and I don't do Worcester, but that guy does, and I'm going to hit him up. Yeah. And so that person ends up getting a wholesale fee and we end up finding a deal. And to that same point, like, so 1, it helps on the deal flow front, but 2, it helps people know your name and know your face. And this is something you can do, right, regardless of how many units you have. And the fact of the matter is that once you get big enough, once you're at a point where you have 100 units, 150 units, 200 units, now you got this long trajectory of content, of posting, of credentials, of history, of podcasts. Now people are like, this guy's the man. This guy knows it all. This guy's got a presence. And so it's funny how the tide shifts and all of a sudden it's like your actions start to speak louder and people are forced to listen.
Yeah, and it's a level of consistency as well. I mean, you're just seeing someone like, okay, and it also authenticity plays a big role in it. I mean, you can tell over the scale of someone's social media if you're following them, like when it goes off course and you're like, this is bullshit, or they're coming in with a big ask. For me, when there's not a big ask and it's like just documenting the journey or just giving free advice, eventually it's going to work. I mean, I remember for anyone who doesn't know, one of your partners is Andrew Freed. He's been on the show, great guy. And I remember when he started, and I was like, I liked him from the beginning because he wasn't trying to do anything else. And I think like when you were starting and you're looking around, you could go and say like, oh wait, well I saw that video, that was a little weird, and then you meet him and you're like, no, that's him. You know what I mean? Because then, like you said, you turn around two years later and you guys are on there talking about, 250 units and like, no, we actually watched that whole journey. Like it's not bullshit. It's all verified. We've seen them standing in front of the buildings. And I think that with you guys working together, you're seeing the results of that. Like you said, there's a lot of different kinds of social media, but everybody should be using it, to their best benefit. And the more authentic, the better.
Yeah. And I think that to your point, I think that most people get started in their local market and then they branch out from there. And so I think to that point, in order to own your local market, people have to know you, respect you, and want to work with you. And I think the fastest way to do that is to begin networking, to post social media content, and to sort of grow your presence that way.
Yeah, I mean, the thing about social media that people forget is it keeps you top of mind when you're just like out to dinner with your friends. You created a video before and someone may see it before they go to bed and they're like, oh, I kind of remember this guy. Then the algorithm starts to hit for them and it starts sending them more because they spent the whole time watching it. I mean, you have to play into it. And if you do it the right way, it always brings business. I think it's important. It's for other people to judge, whether they like it or if they think it's corny. I've never cared about any of that stuff. I know why other people do. But, if you're worried about getting on social media, your whole goal is to meet people in real life, no matter what you do. So there's no reason to hide what's going on. The more you tell people the journey, the more likely they are to be able to have it resonate with them.
Absolutely. And I think that it's like one of the things that, we do a lot is like we actually make videos about things that we were compromised on. So like things that we came across that actually created issues for us. And then we create videos on that content to try to help other people skirt that problem or navigate that problem more smoothly.
Yeah. Awesome, man. Well, where is the best place for people to get in touch with you? I think it's on Instagram at the 1099 Mindset. Is that the best place?
That's right. Yeah. Hit us up on Instagram. I'm at the 1099 Mindset. My partner, as John mentioned, his name is Andrew Freed. He's at Investor Freed on Instagram. And, if you follow either one of us, you're welcome to join our mailing list. We include a multitude of investor tips, all the deals that we're currently working on and the performance of those deals. And then also just like including we open air, how we structure our deals, how the return structure works, all of these things. So whether you're looking to learn and, take and learn from us, that could be a great value for you. Or if you're potentially looking to invest in deals, like always happy to collaborate as well.
Yeah, and we've also had John Bombachi on the show, and he's the one who started the meetups that you guys are really crushing it at. So if anyone who's in Massachusetts, Rhode Island, the meetups are definitely available and a great time. I've seen a lot of great guest speakers. I told Andrew eventually I'll get myself out there. But it looks like a great connective thing. And just from you discussing your journey here, everybody should take note of it, that's where you're really going to start building the relationships. You can do a lot by listening to podcasts, reading books, but until you get out from behind the screen and start talking to investors who have done a little bit more than what you've done and a little less than what you've done, you won't really get as much forward as you hoped. I think like just from what you were saying about your journey, you're crushing the podcast. Then when you start to say like, wow, I'm going to take action. Then you meet people, then your action steps just go 30x because they're all ready to take action.
Exactly. And like you said, when you start to meet people who are, one step behind you or one step in front of you, you start to be able to develop some key takeaways that help improve your own systematic operative system for, operative setup for, you and your team.
Yeah. Awesome, man. Well, I'm glad we got this done. hopefully I will drag it up to Massachusetts to see you guys soon, but I really appreciate you spending the time.
No, thank you so much for having me. And, really, really blessed to be able to share some of this with the listeners here. And I'm really, really thankful for this opportunity.
Yeah, man. All right. Awesome. That was Zachary Gray. I'm Jonathan Green. We'll see you next episode. Wait, you have reached the end of the show. This is the part where you're going to get ready to check out, but I've actually changed this part. For over 120 episodes, you heard the same thing. Well, now I've changed it. I've thought about doing intros to the next episode, but I'm going to hold off on that for now. These are my pitches at the end. I've got nothing to sell you at all, but I do want to remind you that it really would help us if you support the podcast in the right way. All that means is subscribing to the podcast so you get it on Monday and Thursday, writing us a 5-star review if you believe that we deserve a 5-star review, sharing it with your friends, and being a participant in the Zen and the Art of Real Estate Investing community. Soon there's going to be a new website launched. Maybe when you're listening to this, it's already going to be out there. That's where we're going to have collaboration. You're going to be able to see a lot from the guest. It is coming soon, and I just want to tell you, from me to you, I don't know how I got here, over 100 episodes. I'm so appreciative of you listening to the podcast and especially sticking around to hear this part. We'll see you next episode.